Unbound 200 2025 edition bike check. I try to do one of these every year. I did a full rundown on this bike when I built it a couple weeks ago, so you can look in the description below or look at some of my earlier videos. This is just covering the changes I do for Unbound. This will be my 8th Unbound. Main changes, of course, are the Aerobars. Put some different tires on it, put a slightly bigger front chainring, and then the packs are a little bit different. So I'm going to go over, we'll start with the less important stuff. Well, I guess the most important stuff for some of you is the tires. These are 2.1 Thunder Burts. These are the Super Races. Anecdotally, the Super Grounds are a little bit more durable and just as fast, but due to the Dylan Johnson effect, you can't find them anywhere. So I found a set of Super Races, and I'm going to take my chances with these. These are 56 millimeters wide on this wheel. These wheels are from Nextie Carbon. That's Nextie. It's a Chinese company. They do consumer direct. 45 mil deep, 30 mil internal width, hook bead, carbon spokes, DT240 hubs. They're wacky light. They're like 1,250 grams, I think, 1,275 or something like that. They're very, very light. This bike's rated for a 52 millimeter width. These are 56, so a little bit wide. If you're wondering about the mud, I will still run these even if it's a muddy year, which I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a hot year. My strategy, and it's proven to work really well for me, is to basically not let my tires touch the mud. If it's really sticky mud, I pick up my bike, I shoulder it cyclocross style, and I run through the mud. So I'll definitely get passed by a few people early on, but ultimately I will never have to basically stop and clean mud out of my wheels and pull my wheels off or deal with, you know, paint sticks in there. And my drivetrain stays nice and clean and efficient, and that's really, I think, the biggest gain for running through the mud and not riding through it is your drivetrain stays clean, and you're saving 10, 20, 30 watts of drivetrain friction versus, you know, a cassette that's covered in mud. Bottles, these are 30-ounce Zeffel bottles, so I'm wearing a Rule 28 skin suit with a 2-liter bladder, so I'm carrying around 4 liters of fluid. That's for the first aid stations around 7,500 miles. Second aid stations around usually 160 miles, and then you've got a shorter leg out to the finish. So I do the 4 liters worth of water for the first and second aid stations, and for the last aid station I don't replace the bladder. I just survive on the 2 bottles. My feeling for Unbound is all liquid. I basically do no solid food. So I've got, you know, something like 750 calories per bottle and 750 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per bottle. And that's supplemented with gels. And I keep my gels in here. This is an Apidura top tube bag. It's got a magnetic closure, and it's bolted onto the top tube, so it's nice and rigid. It doesn't flop over and fall into your legs. So this will all be full of gels in here. And then this other little one, I usually put mustard packets in here, and then one dynaplug Pro tool. If you're wondering why mustard packets, mustard is basically all vinegar. Vinegar is acetic acid, which is basically what pickle juice is, and it really helps mitigate cramps. Malt vinegar packets work as well, but I like the mustard packets because I like the way they taste. And it's also got a little bit of sodium in it, and you can just tear it off and eat it like a gel. Another thing, if you have issues with cramps, Google reciprocal inhibition. That is reciprocal inhibition. It's basically an exercise of trying to work against the muscle that's cramping, and you can basically unlock it while you're riding the bike if you know which way to flex your leg. I won't try to explain it in this video, but Google that and you'll understand. That's a technique to basically unlock a cramped muscle. Ideally you don't have cramps, but if you do, it's nice to have a mitigation protocol in place. Drivetrain rise. Here in Orange County, most of the climbs are really steep, and some of them are like an hour long. So I run a 40 tooth with the 1051 XTR cassette. For Unbound, I'll run a 42 oval. You know, it's a little bit better gearing for that course, which doesn't have any long climbs or steep climbs. The only kind of quasi-steep climbs are coming out of creek crossings, so they're really brief, and there's only a couple of them. Most of the creek crossings are pretty shallow, and there aren't really any long climbs in Unbound. It's just kind of rolling 3-4% grades. The big hills are maybe 200 or 300 feet, but there's a lot of like 60 to 80, 100 foot hills that are like 3%, so you're kind of motoring up those. So now for the main detail is the Aerobars, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the positioning of the Aerobars and how to make the best use of them. I think this is an important thing if you plan to use them. I have a lot of experience running Aerobars. I've done a lot of individual and team time trials. I've been time trialing for like 30 years. This is not a time trial position by any means. In a time trial position, well, the races, of course, are much shorter, so you can afford to have to be slightly uncomfortable as long as you can make your peak power and be as aerodynamic as possible. So it's aerodynamics first, being able to make power second, and then comfort. Kind of who cares about the comfort in an actual time trial. But for gravel, it's kind of different factors. The primary is saving energy. That's really job one, is to save energy. So they don't need to be super aerodynamic. And second is they need to be comfortable. Again, so that means not necessarily being the most aerodynamic. And aerodynamics you could basically kind of ignore. By just getting your elbows in out of the airstream, you're going to be a lot more aero. So you don't really want to chase aerodynamics and you know, have your buddies go, oh, how low am I, how narrow am I? Just ignore that, because what's going to happen if you really focus on that, you're going to have a really uncomfortable position. And when I see a lot of people running Aerobars, age groupers in Unbound, they've got really bad positions and they're basically not using them half the day because they're really uncomfortable. So a couple tips. One is to make them as wide as possible. So for a TT bike, narrow. For gravel, wide. You need that extra control. The reason mountain bikes have really wide handlebars because it's like power steering, and you need to have these wide because you need to be able to go around turns and keep stability. So don't worry about being wide. You might think, well, that's not aero. Again, don't worry about aero. That's not why you're putting the aero bars on. You want to have control. The other thing is make sure these pads are down underneath your elbows. When you're in the aero bars, that pad needs to be way back here by your elbow. If you have them set where it's like halfway into your forearms, then the weight of your elbow is going to push your arms down like this, and then your hand is going to have to grip tight to keep from your arm from flipping up like this. So what you're doing is gripping. What you cannot have with aero bars for gravel is any position that requires you to clamp and hold yourself in position. If you have to hold yourself in position, your hand's going to last about a half hour, and you've got only about 10 or 11 hours to go, so it's just not going to work. You need to have an aero bar position, if you're going to use them, where your hands are completely relaxed. You can ride at your normalized power, and this is an important thing. Look at what your normalized power is. Look at your data from previous years or any long gravel races and say you normalize 150, 200, 250, 300, whatever the number is, whatever you normalize, pick that number, test at that number, go ride on a flat road, do some shallow grades and some shallow descents. Oh, speaking of shallow grades and descents, don't bother putting aero bars on unless you're going to have shifters on them. Trust me on this. It's a total waste of time unless you have shifters. You have to stay in the aero bars. That's the whole purpose of them. If you're constantly having to go back and forth, or like you don't want to get into the aero bars because you know you're going to have to shift in a few seconds, you'll end up basically not using them. Put shifters on. It's easy to do. These are the wireless blip shifters, but for SRAM they're even wireless up here. It's super easy to do. But in any case, you want to have a position that's going to be relaxed up here. So ride at your normalized power to test, and you should be able to relax, make your normalized power, and be able to basically leave your hand open like this, where you're not actually gripping, and your arm just stays there. It doesn't slide up, it doesn't go this way, it doesn't go this way, it doesn't slide down. It just basically stays there while you're relaxed and not having to, if your back is tight because you're having to use your core to hold your position on there, then you need to change your aero bar position. Keep modifying this until your natural relaxed position. Just get your hand loose on that, and then all you're doing is just basically kind of bouncing over the bumps and your hands moving around, and it's nice and relaxing. I like to use the example of if you walk up to a bar that's full height and you walk, or as you're standing, you lean on the bar and put your forearm and lean on the bar. The way your body can relax there and kind of support your lower body, that's kind of the position that you want with an aero bar for gravel. And that's nothing like a TT position. So should be really relaxed and comfortable. Get these back way down by your elbows, and you want to have them high enough that your neck isn't in an uncomfortable position. If you're riding for, let's say, a half hour and your neck starts to get sore, then you won't ride them late in the race. You want to have an upright position. These bars are a very, very shallow drop. So when I'm in the drops and my elbows are just slightly bent, my torso angle, that's about the same angle that I use in the aero bar. So it's a mildly aggressive position, but one that I can sustain for hours on end, basically the whole length of the race. I've run aero bars for all 7 editions of Unbound 200 that I've done. I've always run aero bars, and I run basically all day. As soon as I get out on my own and I'm not in a big pack anymore, I'm in the aero bars and I run in them all day, and they're comfortable. So you've got to be able to have that nice relaxed position, and it saves you energy. And the funny thing is, you use your core and your arms more than you think when you're riding on the hoods. You probably notice your arms sometimes get tired, or your hands get tired. That's going to go away when you get a nice aero bar position. So you'll be able to save energy, and that energy actually goes into the pedals. Now this may seem counterintuitive, but once you get used to riding on the Aerobars on a gravel bike, or even on a TT bike for that matter, you'll find that your sustained normalized power will actually go up, because the energy you save by not having to hold your body up here actually can go into the pedals. And that sounds counterintuitive, but it's something that I've seen in my own data. That kind of came as a surprise to me when I first started collecting data on this like 20 years ago. So definitely an advantage to do that. If you're wondering how these are attached, on the Ridley Astr, there's a company in France, I'll see if I can link it in the description below, that makes these plastic adapters and then this machined piece, and then it uses a standard 2-bolt profile mount. There's a couple different options here. This company in France makes these adapters for a lot of different aerodynamic handlebars. So if you've got like, you know, an NV handlebar or a Specialized or some either OEM or an aftermarket aerodynamic, you know, basically wing foil shaped handlebar, they make these plastic adapters for them. Again, it's a company in France. If you Google it, you'll probably find it, but hopefully I can find it and put it in the description below. What else? That's, I think, the bulk of it. I'll have some more information on the drivetrain after Unbound. We will see you in Emporia.